As always happens, the private sector fooled us once again. Why did we get CDOs? Why did we get credit default swaps? There's the fantastic story of the development of these markets in this book here by Gillian Tett called Fool's Gold. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Story of what JP Morgan was up to, and when they created this market, there was a reason there was a market, because financial institutions wanted to avoid regulation. It was a way to get out of holding capital against investments that you made. And the more funds that kept flowing in from China, the more money there is looking for yield, the more incentive there is to find ways to park that yield, to lever up, and to avoid the capital restrictions that apply to the banking system, but not the non-banking system, not the shadow banking system, which lo and behold, it turns out, is a banking system. This is inevitable. So here's my bottom line. Innovation inevitably outpaces regulatory schemes. Differences in regulatory oversight and requirements across institutions, markets, countries. Now we're going to globalize this problem. It makes regulatory arbitrage a fact of life, and we better get used to it. And we better deal with it. In fact, here's my bottom line to all this. The fuel, the global savings glut that provides just a massive amount of incentives to lever up, to create risk. Not so clear that's going away. Or all of a sudden we're going to wake up one morning and the US and Europe are giant savers and the Chinese aren't? I don't know. There are people working on this problem. The IMF is working on a way to provide some sort of collective insurance for emerging markets that don't require them to accumulate treasury securities. But even they admit there's a limit to how far that can go. How do we solve this problem? It's an incomplete insurance market, created in part by the fact that they're incomplete markets in emerging economies and they're growing faster than their own economies can absorb those resources. We better just accept that this is probably going to be with us. It's unclear to me, as I've argued, that monetary policy, better monetary policy is a solution. Yeah, okay, we're learning some stuff. But if you actually write down these optimal rules, I told you the coefficient on the stock market is a little tiny thing. It's not going to make any difference. In any event, those models aren't about what the real problem is, which is the shadow banking system and the banking system, which are one and the same. It's just that one part is regulated, the other part is not regulated, or not regulated as much, which leads me to regulation and supervision can be part of the problem as well as a solution to the problem, but sooner or later, probably part. So what we need, what we don't need, is a bunch of rules that say banks, financial institutions can't do the stuff that they did 3 years ago. Hey guys, that's 3 years ago. That's the last war. Let's get ready for the next war. What we need is Boy Scout regulation. Be prepared. Accept that monetary policy can't fix stuff in an environment where the fuel for the fire is there and there's every incentive to light the match. Accept that failure is going to be with us, and let's figure out a system where we can pick up the pieces without burning the entire house down. Anybody listen to me? No, but one can only hope. I actually still think that pony's out there. So with that, I'll shut up and be glad to address, if you got any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Good.
Thanks, Dave.